more recruiting talk on the podcast today, joined by John Garcia here on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. We're going to be talking about people who might be committed somewhere else, but might be coming to Georgia anyway. And then we're going to talk about people who have already committed and are already on campus, who John thinks might be making an impact. All of that and more today on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Happy Wednesday to you. I am Daniel, and as I mentioned, I'm joined by John Garcia Jr., recruiting guru and expert. Before we get started, want to make sure that I thank the fine folks over at LinkedIn Jobs. They are the official college football recruiting sponsor across all of the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates that you want to talk to and faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, John, you're on so many of these podcasts. First of all, how many times a day do you hear that little ad read? You have it memorized by now.
Look, it's tough to say LinkedIn and Locked On back.
It's a lot.
So
it's just
I don't envy you guys in that regard.
No, it's a lot. It's a lot. John, you're gracious as always to join us. I want to jump in. We've asked you a lot about some specific players in recent weeks. Obviously, Georgia's had plenty of recruiting drama, as they always do in every cycle, but they've had plenty of drama in this cycle as well. And we're far from over in the 2023 cycle. So talk to us about names that maybe Georgia fans should be keeping at the front of their mind, not necessarily people who are imminently going to commit, but just names that, if you're a Georgia fan, far from your mind as we move forward in 2023.
Well, yeah, I'll keep it in kind of the southern region, Daniel. I think that makes the most sense for Georgia fans. I'll start off at IMG Academy, a school that has obviously been pretty good to UGA in the past. I think last year, Dalen Everett, Bear Alexander, a couple great examples. Jonel Aguero, verbal commit, was from IMG last year. I'll start down there with Samuel Mpemba. I think he's a guy who we know is really going to take his time with the process. And we know, there's always a desire for more edge talent, and he could be one of the top 2 or 3 edge guys in the entire class. So I think he's gotten a little less buzz nationally because he's comparatively taking it slow. It seemed like everyone else wanted to make this decision in July or August ahead of their senior season so they could focus on football. We hear those quotes all the time, and that's great, but there's still a contingency of elite players that have the luxury to take their time, and Mpemba is one of those guys. The more he assimilates to that edge position, I think the more attractive a school like Georgia could be on his list. And he's got a wide-ranging list. It's Miami, it's Florida, it's Georgia, Notre Dame. He's got some West Coast schools in there, wants to see Oregon. So I think there's a whole lot of let's see how the season goes for a lot of these programs, but we know what we're getting with the Georgia Bulldogs. So I think in that regard, if some of those teams maybe don't profile the way he's expecting, a school like Georgia can hang around and stay at the top of this race for the long haul. And one source actually told me they thought Georgia could be the team to beat long-term for Mpemba. So I think that would profile well positionally and certainly optically when you pull an IMG Academy elite. So he's one I would keep an eye on. And then 2 more front 7 guys in the state of Alabama that are now confirmed to 100% be package deals. I know I'm always skeptical of this, but I was with James Smith and Quay Rousseau in person at Florida over the last weekend, and they doubled down on the package deal thing. They like Florida, by the way. It was their first time there, but most people consider this more of an Alabama-Georgia situation, and we've seen these battles go back and forth, right? I mean, there's really no other way to put that, but they've really doubled down on the package deal element of the process, and they don't have an official list of schools. They said it's going to come out soon, but look, Georgia's going to be on there. Alabama's going to be on there. That's going to be a heavyweight slugfest type of battle that is also, we think, going to stretch like in Pemba, maybe all the way till December. So I do think that them together could be an interesting package for Georgia, because I think at one point we felt like James Smith was more likely to Georgia, Rasal, maybe Bama or Auburn. But now they're so set on this package deal thing that I'm like, it's probably going to come down to Alabama and Georgia anyway. So it's like one kid versus the other. It could come down to it in the end. So who's more influential? It could be fascinating to follow. So I would play the long game if I'm a Georgia fan, especially with some of those front seven recruits. There's a lot still ahead for the Bulldogs in this cycle. But, it's not like it's been bad before. Top 5 class for us. That's illustrated and a lot of room to move up, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that's the funny thing about this recruiting, especially now when you get a lot of you tend to always get this wave of early commitments, but you got to remind yourself recruiting is it's not over till it's over, and it's a long, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, all those types of things. And so it's like you said, it's not like Georgia's got a bad class in the barn right now. It's at full, but some Georgia fans wringing their hands about some guys that maybe missed on and all of that, but a lot more talent still out there. You just bring up, give me a real quick answer, because you bring up, Impemba, and you bring up Miami as kind of a big suitor to him. Obviously Miami's got the new coaching situation, and that seems like there's a lot of momentum down there. And then obviously bring up Florida, with maybe not as huge contenders, for the two kids out of Alabama, but Florida's got their own thing going. They've had a little momentum in the 2023 class as well. Who's a bigger threat to Georgia long term, the current staff at Miami or the current staff at Florida, do you think?
Oh, that's a great question. You could really kind of tilt it either way. I actually asked Impemba at IMG last week how he views those two. How do you view them differently? And he said, well, Miami's got more buzz. Obviously, the city is very attractive to go to. But then he said Florida, kind of defensive-minded, and you get the SEC tag, which is so important in any recruit's decision, especially on that side of the ball. So it's kind of even between the two. But I think nationally, Miami's probably more equipped nationally. So if you're battling for a kid from Texas or California or North Carolina, I would say the Hurricanes. But, closer to home, Alabama, Georgia, Northern Florida, I think the Gators would profile long-term as the more competitive suitor. But they're very close, really, no matter how you look at it. I think in the rankings, one was 9 and one was like 12. So they're all right there near each other, and both have had considerable momentum this summer. So that's a great question that will probably be asked down in Sunshine State like every day from here on out.
Yeah, a very political answer on John Garcia's part. He says both are, but if he knew his audience, he would have doubled down on the Miami, because everyone on this podcast wants you to say Florida is done and Miami is here to stay. But I think it'll be interesting to watch that moving. Well, I got more to talk to you about. First, I want to let the people online. They are your online sportsbook experts, and they are the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. The only place that Clint and I trust to make all of our wagers online. Football season is coming. There's win totals that are out right now. There's national championship. There's conference championship odds that are out right now. All of these things, you should be focusing all of your attention betting wise. Forget about baseball. Forget about the NFL. You don't know who's going to be suspended and for how many games they're going to be suspended and all things. So focus all your attention on college football. Go to BetOnline right now. Enter the promo code Locked On. You get a bonus on your initial deposit. That's free money with which to wager at BetOnline. They are your online sportsbook experts, partner of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. That's betonline.net. Enter the promo code Locked On for a bonus on your initial deposit. All right, John, let's talk about some flips here. This is a tougher question, I know, for you to answer. It's kind of maybe, like you don't know. You don't have, like I know you talk to these kids and you hear the buzz and whatever. We're not asking you to, to work any magic and give us any definite thing. If they were definite, then it would already be out there. But it seems as though Kirby has a reputation, at least among Georgia fans, at least among me. Kirby has a reputation for some signing day drama. He tends to, as a lock to Auburn or a lock to another SEC school, or seems to be, been committed for a long time somewhere. And wouldn't you know it, round about signing day, that those kids tend to make their way down to Athens. And so as a Georgia fan, you kind of come to expect it, which is, on the one hand, it's maybe unfair to expect that kind of magic out of Kirby every year. But on the other hand, he's the best in the business. And so, you with that success comes those expectations. And so who are guys that are not open market guys, who are already committed to another school, but Georgia fans might just want to keep their eye on them a little bit as the recruit?
Yeah, that's a great question, Daniel. I think certainly, you think of the quarterback and running back position, and there might not be specific names to drop just yet, but those are big target areas for UGA here going forward.
Sure.
So I think those kind of come without saying, and that will develop as the season does. But I think we've seen some traction with some other prospects that have been committed and are looking into SEC territory. I think Keon Keeley's one that deserves to be brought up, longtime Notre Dame commitment, but he's out of Tampa, Florida, and he has continued to take visits to Florida, to Alabama this past weekend. I think Georgia's trying to get him on campus for a game this year. There is a sense that if he stays closer to home, he's going to play SEC football. And again, you talk about the best recruiting staffs in the country, and Georgia's right up there with all of them, particularly, again, for some of those defensive recruits. So those would be some names that I would keep an eye on. I think there's room on the offensive line to potentially try to flip some prospects. We've seen Georgia in the thick of a lot of these battles, and they've gone either way. But I think there's some traction to potentially, flip or reflip prospects that have been, undecided in the past. And there's still some uncommitted guys, of course, Okunlola, Monroe Freeling as well, that are set to come off the board sometime relatively soon or not. Maybe they take it all the way. There's still TBD with some of those recruits as well. And a lot of these kids are going to commit again before the season starts. So you wonder if they start to take visits to other schools for games. Maybe they want to check out UGA in person. A guy who comes to mind like that is Tony Mitchell, the Alabama commitment, who is a safety target. You miss on Caleb Downs. Maybe you want to get Bama back and flip one of their DBs from in-state in Tony Mitchell. He's shown some willingness to go out and take visits. He just committed to Bama, but he was at Texas A&M this past weekend. We know Georgia was the other finalist in that conversation. So I think that could be an interesting prospect to keep an eye on down the line. So I think generally kids already in that SEC footprint are just feel more flippable. So positionally, I'd look at quarterback, running back, but individual players, I'm thinking more defense. Tony Mitchell, Keon Keeley comes to mind right at the top of the list.
Yeah, more. I like that. Again, appreciate some specific names, even though you try to be, again, as always, diplomatic in your answer. Appreciate that. But you mentioned Georgia's staff, and a lot of these. It seems like the offensive talent is need on this Georgia team, and yet the staff has shown no sign of slowing down when it comes to recruiting top defensive players from all over. Quickly segment. Glenn Schumann just signed big extension, big new. Obviously, Kirby got his new contract, but then Glenn Schumann got his new contract as well. Georgia fans already know who this guy is, but from a national recruiting landscape, how good is Glenn Schumann, and what kind of a difference does a guy like that at the helm of the defense for Georgia? Kirby's the big dog, and he's making it all happen. But how important? You lose a guy like Dan Lanning, but then when you're able to slide a guy like Glenn Schumann right in to that role, how critical is that for Georgia to be able to maintain staff like that?
That's huge. That's so hard to do coming off of a national title. We used to see Alabama do it every year, and now Georgia's experiencing it where when you win, people want to build that elsewhere, right? Obviously, Lanning is the best example of that. I think Monken's going to start to get some of those overtures in the coming years. It's just something that comes with success. So seeing how Kirby navigates that will be critical. The extension for him helps to navigate it, and getting his assistants a couple more dollars never hurts in that same pursuit. And with Schumann in particular, Daniel, I think you can make the argument if you associate an assistant coach with a position where there's prowess both in recruiting, development, and the on-field product, Schumann with linebackers is right up there with Corey Raymond and defensive backs, Brian Hartline with wide receivers. I think Kyle Flood on the O-line's got one of those, Sam Pittman as well, reputation. So I think that group that he just sent to the NFL certainly provides a whole lot of benefit of the doubt for recruits going forward. And look at the best position group Georgia has on board right now. It might be DB, but I think it's linebacker. Troy Bowles. I mean, Raylan Wilson runs as well as a guy who's 50 pounds lighter. CJ Allen is no slouch as well. So I love the group that they've already built. It's my favorite linebacker core class in the country for 2023 right now. And I think Glenn Schumann is obviously the core reason for a lot of those guys. If you had to go beat big boy competition to get all of them. I know Allen's in state, so it appears as a layup, but Troy Bowles, you had to beat Ohio State. You had to beat Oklahoma, Clemson, who he really liked. With Raylan Wilson, he was a Michigan commitment when you started really digging your heels in on him, and then you complete the flip there to just remind folks of what happened on the field in the playoff as well. So I think that group is special. That group should continue to be special under Schumann's watch, and I think it's more emphasized now with him calling the shots as a defensive coordinator in conjunction with Kirby, as you mentioned. That post is as coveted as it will get in college football because of that connection to Kirby Smart, much like we hear with other coaches associated with one side of the ball.
Yeah, and you mentioned, in that, and you know more than I do, but the difference between that DB class and the linebacker class is need, area of need. You expect the DB class to be huge because Georgia needs it, quite frankly. But you look at the linebacker class, and you got Xavier Sori and Smile Mondon from 2 years ago. You got C.J. Washington, and the other kid, Ruben, out of last year. You got the linebacker class has been strong each and every year. The cupboard is stacked, and yet, like to your point, Glenn Schumann just keeps going out there, taking care of business and bringing in prospects. All right, I want to talk a little bit about some of those players on campus with you from last year. That to take on who it is that we might see on the field this fall making a difference for the red and black right after this. All right, John. So I know you're focused on 2023. This is all old news to you. You've forgotten all of these names. You've just immediately erased them from your brain. I don't know how you keep these names straight in your brain in the first place. It's unbelievable that just how you pull names out of a hat. I can't keep track of one roster, but you're keeping track of the entire high school football landscape. So forgive me for asking you to access last year's brain. But Georgia signed a pretty good class in 2022. Maybe you heard of it. Players that are now on campus, some of them early enrollees, some of them not. And I know that you're not as familiar with the Georgia depth chart as I am. You're not as familiar maybe as our listeners are with the ins and outs of Georgia football. So maybe take depth out of it. Take position of need out of it even. And you just tell me from your evaluation of these kids, from what you saw as they were coming up through the ranks, they've now been on campus. They're now studying under Todd Monken and Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart and staff. So who is it in that 2022 class that Georgia is about to see take the field this fall that you could see? You wouldn't be surprised at all if they make an instant impact, if we see them out on the field, not teams, but maybe even getting into that rotation and making some significant offense-defense plays this fall.
My mind goes to the edge class, Daniel. I know there's the front seven was so darn good last year that you just know new names have to pop in because all those guys, outside of Jalen and Nolan are in the NFL. So I'm looking at the edge class, which for me was the best group Georgia brought in last year. I know the secondary class was very good, O-line as well, but I really love the edge group. I think UGA was the only school to sign 3 SI 99 recruits at that edge spot. And 2 of them were at the very top. Michael Williams and Marvin Harris, certainly very, very highly thought of. But we were high on Darius Smith, too. I think he's a freaky athlete who, when you talk about that position, you see situational value, right? And I think that's where there could be some splashes from this crew. And what's interesting about those 3 pass rushers, they're all very, very different. I think Marvin Jones, I said Marvin Harris. With Jones, I think you get kind of a balanced pass rusher, right? Extremely long, still developing from a physical standpoint, but he can bend, he can win with speed. With Michael, you get the total package of a big, physical, strong side defensive end where he can beat you with speed, but can also counter with legitimate power and some advanced technique. And then with Darius, you get the raw athlete, track star, long as the tallest of the group, which is saying something, the longest arms of the group, which is saying something. So you talk about, the value, you have variance in these pass rushers. And we all know you can't have enough pass rushers in this day and age of college football. So depending on down distance and package, I could see one or multiple of these edge rushers really factoring in for Georgia when it counts most. And we've seen that over the years, that these freshmen translate at that position at a high rate, especially when they're brought along slowly. And the first step for most of them is usually third down, situational pass rushing. That's where we see guys really come into their own. And I think this group that are true freshmen is pretty darn special.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, that's a great point in terms of if you are a quarterback, if you're an O lineman, you got to get a lot of snaps, in order to really make a difference on the team. But you're talking about some of these guys, you could play 5 snaps in a game, and you could have 2 quarterback pressures and a sack in those 5 snaps. And after the game, everybody's talking about you like you're the MVP of the defense when you were only out there on 3rd and 15, a few different times. And that's an interesting, I think when you think about the depth and you compare what you just said and you combine that with the depth on the roster, I think, you lose a lot of interior depth at Georgia. Obviously, you keep guys like Nolan Smith and Robert B. good players on the edge. And so a lot of people assume, well, there's not a ton of room on the edge because you got both of your edge guys are really coming back. You got those 2 guys in the fold. But when you lose guys like Devontae Wyatt, like Jordan Davis, guys that you just, you can't take Devontae Wyatt off the field. He's too good on 3rd down. Doesn't matter what the down and distance is. But this year you have Jalen Carter still, and we'll see how Zion Logue and some of these other guys progress and do for Georgia. But you might see a lot more packages, like you said, on specific down and distances where you might get 3, 4 edge guys on the field at the same time, and you might start to see Kirby Muschamp get a little bit creative. And so you can't always look at the depth chart because, the depth chart doesn't always play out like that, as you said. And as an edge defender, you can wreck a game in just a handful of plays. I think that Darius Smith is that's the one that I don't think Georgia everybody knows Marvin Jones, everybody knows Michael Williams. Like these are the 5-star, the premier, these are the guys that you build your recruiting class around. But that Darius Smith, that's an interesting one for Georgia coming on the defensive front. So appreciate jumping on with us today. We'll have you back on. I'm sure there'll be much more to talk about in the 2023 class. And Clint and I will be back later this week with more on the University of Georgia. Locked On Bulldogs here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We'll see you guys later.